The morning sun painted the vast estate of Silverbrook Valley in shades of gold, creating a landscape that seemed pulled from a fairy tale. Among the wildflowers that danced in the gentle breeze, a 6-year-old girl ran barefoot, her chestnut hair flowing like silk ribbons behind her. Lucy laughed with the pure innocence that only children possess, chasing butterflies that seemed to play hide and seek among the daisies. Her blue eyes sparkled with the wonder of someone who still believed the world was made only of beautiful things. She didn't understand why she lived in that small cottage at the edge of the property, far from the imposing mansion that rose on the horizon like a castle from a storybook. For Lucy, it was just another mystery of the adult world, like so many others that populated her innocent universe. The estate stretched for hundreds of acres, surrounded by green pastures where majestic horses galloped freely. On the mansion's grand terrace, a figure watched the child with eyes that reflected no paternal love, but something far more sinister. Nathaniel Blackwood adjusted the cuff of his Italian shirt, his face carved in cold marble, maintaining a calculating expression. At 52, he had built an empire that extended far beyond these lands, but that child playing innocently among the flowers represented a crack in his perfect facade, a crack that threatened to destroy everything he had fought for. His new wife, Victoria, had made it clear from their wedding day that she would not tolerate complications from the past in her socialite life. The message had been delivered with the subtlety of a high society lady, but with the firmness of an ultimatum. Lucy stopped running and looked toward the mansion, timidly waving at the distant figure. But Nathaniel only looked away, pretending not to have seen the gesture. Mrs. Rose, the elderly housekeeper who cared for Lucy, had gone to town to buy medicine. The child was alone, as she had been so many times before. But today something was different. The silence seemed deeper, more charged with expectation. Even the birds had stopped singing. It was then that a sound cut through the air like a sharp blade, a fierce, savage bark that froze the blood in Lucy's veins. She turned slowly, her eyes widening with terror. On the other side of the field, an enormous dog was approaching at full speed, its fangs exposed, gleaming under the golden sunlight. The animal was a beast of dark fur, muscles tense with fury, eyes injected with primitive rage. It was no longer the disciplined guard dog she knew from a distance. It was something transformed by the most basic instinct of hunt and destruction. Lucy tried to run, but her small childish legs couldn't compete with the speed of the predator approaching her. Each bark seemed to resonate like thunder in her ears, each passing second diminishing the distance between her and those fangs that promised pain. On the mansion's terrace, Nathaniel watched the scene with an expression he believed was horror, but his eyes betrayed a sinister satisfaction. Everything was happening exactly as he had planned, but fate had other plans. A different sound cut through the air. Not more savage barks, but the powerful bellow of a bull. And then, as if emerging from a fairy tale, a majestic black bull leaped the neighboring ranch's fence, positioning himself between the girl and the approaching beast. The massive bull stood tall on his hind legs, his dark mane flowing like silk in the wind, emitting a bellow that resonated across the fields like a war cry. Lucy crouched behind the powerful legs of her unexpected protector, her small hands trembling as she clung to the silky fur of the animal. The bull lowered his head, gently touching the child's face with his velvety muzzle, as if wanting to reassure her that she was now safe. The guard dog, confused by the unexpected intervention, growled low but stepped back, recognizing a superior force it dared not challenge. It was then that another man appeared, jumping the fence with the agility of someone who knew every stone of that land. Marcus Sullivan, 55 years old, face weathered by sun and hands calloused by honest work, ran toward his bull with a mixture of concern and admiration. "Thunder, what are you doing here, friend?" he called, his voice loaded with genuine affection for the animal. Nathaniel descended the mansion steps with quick strides, assuming an expression of feigned concern. "My God, what's happening here?" he shouted, but Marcus observed the scene with growing suspicion. Something wasn't right there, and his veteran rancher's instincts alerted him to danger. He looked at the child, noticing how she shrank every time Nathaniel spoke, as if his voice was the trigger for deep, primitive fear. "And this little princess?" Marcus asked, kneeling beside Lucy. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Lucy looked up, and Marcus was shocked by what he saw. It wasn't just fear, it was pure terror, the kind that only arises when a child can't distinguish between protection and danger in their own home. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. Thunder remained positioned protectively, and Marcus felt his heart contract, recognizing in Lucy's gesture the silent gratitude of a soul that rarely received kindness. As Nathaniel insisted they leave, Marcus made sure to speak directly to Lucy. "If you need anything, anything at all, our ranch is right there. Just shout loud enough and I'll hear you, okay?" Time seemed to stop, and Nathaniel felt his world beginning to crumble. The child he had tried to eliminate had found a protector, and that was something he couldn't allow. What do you think drives a parent to see their own child as nothing more than an obstacle to be eliminated from their perfect life? 3 days passed since the incident in the field, but Marcus couldn't get the image of Lucy out of his head. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that terrified look, the way she had shrunk upon hearing Nathaniel's voice. His father's instincts, though he had never had children of his own, screamed that something was terribly wrong at the Blackwood estate. In the kitchen of his simple but cozy home, Marcus talked with his wife Sarah about his concerns. "I can't forget that child," Marcus confessed, absently stirring his coffee. "There was something in her eyes, Sarah, as if she was silently asking for help." Sarah stopped kneading and turned toward her husband. 48 years of life had taught her to trust his instincts, especially when it came to children. "And what do you plan to do?" "Nathaniel Blackwood is a powerful man. People like us don't make accusations lightly against people like him." Meanwhile, in the cottage at the back of the luxurious estate, Lucy played alone with a worn rag doll. Mrs. Rose had returned from town but seemed strangely nervous, whispering prayers in a low voice and constantly looking out the windows. The housekeeper had worked for the Blackwood family for over 20 years, but she had never witnessed something that disturbed her as much as recent events. That afternoon, Marcus decided to take a walk along the boundaries of his property, secretly hoping to have another opportunity to see Lucy. Thunder accompanied him, and the bulls seemed equally restless. It was then they heard music, a childish voice humming a sad song, loaded with a melancholy that shouldn't exist in someone so young. Marcus followed the sound until he found Lucy sitting alone under a tree on the border between the two properties. "Hello, little one," he said softly so as not to frighten her. Lucy looked up, and for the first time Marcus saw a genuine smile illuminate her face. "It's the man with the pretty bull," she exclaimed, getting up and running toward Thunder. "Do you like bulls?" Marcus asked, carefully observing the interaction. "I love bulls," Lucy replied, her eyes shining with rare joy. "They're kind and don't yell at me." The phrase hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. Normal children didn't make that distinction between kindness and yelling as if it were something extraordinary. "Does someone yell at you, Lucy?" he asked gently. The child's smile disappeared instantly, and she showed that frightened look that disturbed him so much. "I can't talk about that," she whispered, looking nervously toward the mansion. Marcus felt his heart contract. In that moment, he had absolute certainty that Lucy was in danger. If you're finding this incredible story as shocking as Marcus did while witnessing these warning signs, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. These real-life encounters remind us that children often suffer in silence, and it's up to caring adults to notice the signs and take action. Your support helps us continue sharing these important stories that shed light on the reality many vulnerable children face every day. It was at that moment that Nathaniel appeared, coming from the mansion with long strides and a furious expression. The transformation in Lucy was instantaneous. The child who seconds before had been smiling now shrank like a flower, wilting at the first touch of ice. Her little hands trembled, and she hid behind Marcus's legs, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by either man. "Marcus, what a surprise to find you here again," Nathaniel said, his voice loaded with artificial cordiality. "Lucy, what are you doing out here?" Mrs. Rose must be worried. "We were just talking," Marcus said, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Lucy was telling me how much she likes bulls." "Lucy has a very active imagination," Nathaniel replied, extending his hand toward the child with a gesture that seemed affectionate, but made the little girl step back even further. Sometimes she confuses reality with fantasy. Isn't that right, daughter? The word daughter sounded strange on his lips, and Marcus noticed how Lucy shuddered upon hearing it. She seems very lucid to me, Marcus observed, his hand naturally resting on Lucy's shoulder in a protective gesture. Children are usually more honest than adults. The comment hit Nathaniel like a well-aimed arrow. Thunder, sensing the negative energy, positioned himself between Nathaniel and Lucy, creating a subtle but effective physical barrier. Your bull seems agitated, Nathaniel commented, his voice acquiring an almost imperceptible hardness. I hope it's not dangerous. Thunder only gets agitated when he senses threats, Marcus replied, his eyes fixed on Nathaniel's face. Animals have a very acute instinct for detecting danger. The tension in the air was palpable. Nathaniel felt his self-control being tested to the limit. Lucy, he said, his voice acquiring a tone of command that made the child visibly tremble. Go home now. Mrs. Rose is waiting for you for dinner. Lucy looked at Marcus with pleading eyes as if imploring not to have to leave. Go, little one, Marcus said softly, kneeling to be at her eye level. But remember what I told you. If you need anything at all, I'll be here. Lucy nodded timidly and began walking toward the cottage, but she stopped and turned around. Mr. Marcus, can Thunder come visit me again? Before Marcus could respond, Nathaniel intervened. Lucy, bulls are large animals and can be dangerous. It's better you keep your distance. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. The man who had released a vicious dog was now concerned about the child's safety around a docile bull. The two men were left alone, and the facade of civility finally began to crack. Look, Marcus, Nathaniel said, his voice losing all pretense of cordiality. I appreciate your concern, but Lucy is my responsibility. I know what's best for her. Responsibility, Marcus repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a question. Sometimes neighbors who are too curious can get into trouble they can't resolve. Marcus didn't step back an inch. And sometimes neighbors who are too silent can discover they had more strength than they imagined. Nathaniel stepped forward menacingly. By the way, Marcus, it would be a shame if something happened to your bull. Animals that leave their territories sometimes find accidents. The threat was as clear as crystal. Marcus felt a cold fury settle in his chest but kept his voice controlled. It really would be a shame, especially because Thunder has an excellent memory. Bulls never forget the faces or voices of people who represent danger. In that moment, Marcus knew the battle for Lucy's soul had officially begun. How would you react if you discovered that a child you cared about was living in constant fear in what should be the safest place in the world? Dark clouds gathered in the sky during the early morning hours, and when the sun attempted to rise, it found only a gray blanket that transformed the day into a melancholic extension of night. Rain began to fall in heavy drops, each one seeming to carry the weight of tears not shed by Lucy. In the cottage at the back, the child woke to the sound of thunder rumbling across the fields, while Mrs. Rose slept in the next room, exhausted by days of tension. The rain would be perfect for Nathaniel's plans. Accidents happen more frequently on rainy days. Slippery terrain, reduced visibility, so many plausible explanations for unexpected tragedies. Victoria came down the stairs wearing an imported silk robe, commenting with morbid satisfaction. Perfect weather for resolving pending problems. Exactly what I was thinking, Nathaniel agreed. Children can be so careless on rainy days. At that moment, loud knocks interrupted the cottage's peace. Mrs. Rose opened the door to find Nathaniel standing in the rain, his expensive clothes soaked, but his face maintaining that cold expression she had learned to fear. I need to talk to Lucy, he said, entering without waiting for permission. Alone. Rose hesitated, all her instincts screaming that this was wrong, but she knew that openly defying Nathaniel could have terrible consequences. As soon as they were alone, Nathaniel approached Lucy with slow, deliberate steps. The child curled up in a corner of the room, hugging her doll as if it were a shield against the approaching evil. Lucy, he said, his voice adopting a falsely sweet tone that was even more terrifying than his shouts. We need to talk about your new friend. I didn't do anything wrong, Lucy whispered, her voice so low it was barely audible. Of course not, Nathaniel agreed, kneeling beside her. But sometimes, even when we don't do anything wrong, bad things can happen, especially to people who meddle where they're not called. Lucy didn't fully understand the words, but she perfectly comprehended the implicit threat. Your friend Marcus has a very pretty bull, Nathaniel continued, his voice maintaining that dangerously soft tone. It would be a shame if something happened to him. Bulls can be so vulnerable on rainy days. The threat was as clear as crystal, even to a 6-year-old mind. Lucy understood that any approach to Marcus could result in something terrible happening to Thunder, and she couldn't allow her protector to be hurt because of her. You're a smart girl, Nathaniel said, standing up. I'm sure you'll make the right decision. He headed to the door but stopped before leaving. Oh, and Lucy, remember that accidents can happen to anyone, even elderly housekeepers who talk too much. With those words he left, leaving Lucy alone with her fears and tears. The days following the terrifying conversation were the longest and loneliest of Lucy's life. The child who once ran through the fields with childhood's natural joy now kept herself secluded in the cottage, avoiding any place where she might be seen from the neighboring property. Mrs. Rose noticed the change immediately. Lucy had become a shadow of herself, speaking only when absolutely necessary and losing the sparkle in her eyes. On the other side of the fence, Marcus also noticed the absence. For 3 consecutive days, he walked along the boundaries of his property, hoping to see Lucy playing in the fields, but she had simply disappeared from sight. Thunder seemed equally restless, neighing in the direction of the neighboring estate and attempting to jump the fence every time Marcus relaxed his vigilance. She's gone, Marcus told Sarah during dinner, his concern evident in every word. It's been 3 days since I've seen any trace of her. Nathaniel spent hours observing through the windows, waiting for Lucy to eventually appear so he could monitor her movements. He knew he had planted seeds of deep fear in the child's heart, but he needed to ensure the message had been fully understood. In the cottage, Lucy hid behind the curtains when she saw the figures on the mansion's terrace. Even at a distance, she could feel the weight of their gazes, and it made her tremble with fear. She had spent the last days inventing excuses not to leave the house, pretending headaches and stomach aches to avoid having to play in the yard. My child, Rose tried once more, kneeling beside Lucy, who was mechanically playing with her doll. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? Lucy looked up, and Rose was shocked by what she saw. It was no longer the frightened look of a confused child. It was the gaze of someone who had seen the true face of evil and knew she was completely defenseless against it. I can't talk, Lucy whispered, her voice loaded with a weight no child should carry. If I talk, bad things will happen to people I love. Rose's blood froze in her veins. Those words confirmed her worst suspicions about what Nathaniel had said to the child during their private conversation. That night, Marcus decided to take matters into his own hands. He couldn't bear the uncertainty about Lucy's well-being any longer. He waited until darkness enveloped the fields, and then walked silently to the fence dividing the 2 properties. Through the cottage window, he could see Rose sitting alone in the kitchen, her worried expression evident even at a distance. There was no trace of Lucy. Marcus whistled softly, and Thunder approached silently. What do you think, friend? Marcus whispered. Something's very wrong here. As if understanding perfectly his owner's concerns, Thunder directed his gaze toward the cottage and emitted a low, melancholic neigh. A sound Marcus had never heard before, something that resembled suspiciously sadness. Suddenly, a small curtain moved in the cottage window. For a fraction of a second, Marcus saw Lucy's face appear, her eyes wide with surprise upon seeing Thunder. But as soon as their gazes met, she quickly disappeared, as if she had seen something that frightened her. Marcus felt his heart contract. The child's reaction confirmed that something terrible had happened. The girl who once ran joyfully toward Thunder now hid from him, as if his presence represented danger. She's afraid, Marcus murmured, the revelation hitting him like a punch to the stomach. Someone taught her to fear us. Lucy was clearly imprisoned by her own fear, and that was something he couldn't allow to continue. What would you do if you were a 6-year-old child forced to choose between your own safety and protecting the only people who had ever shown you genuine kindness? The morning of the 7th day brought with it a thick fog that enveloped the fields like a mystery blanket. Mrs. Rose woke with a decision that had formed in her heart during a sleepless night of prayers and reflections. She couldn't passively watch while Lucy consumed herself under the weight of terror that Nathaniel had implanted in her childish soul. After watching Lucy push food around her plate without eating, Rose made her final decision. She walked to the dividing fence at the exact moment Marcus was making his morning rounds with Thunder. "Mr. Marcus," she called in a low voice, looking nervously back to ensure no one was watching. "I need to talk to you." Marcus approached immediately, noticing the desperation in the elderly woman's voice. "Mrs. Rose, what happened? How is Lucy?" She's dying inside," Rose said, her words loaded with deep sadness. "And I can no longer remain silent, knowing I have the power to help." The next words that came from Rose's mouth changed everything. "The dog attack wasn't an accident," she confessed, her hands trembling as she gripped the fence. "I saw Nathaniel move the kennel latch moments before. He wanted the animal to attack Lucy." Marcus felt the world spin around him. Although his suspicions had been confirmed, hearing the truth spoken aloud was like receiving a blow to the stomach. "My God," he whispered. "Why? Why would he do that to his own daughter?" "Because she shouldn't exist," Rose replied, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. "She's the daughter of a previous relationship, before his marriage to Victoria. The new wife made it clear she wouldn't tolerate reminders of the past in her perfect life." The revelation hit Marcus like lightning. Lucy wasn't just a neglected child. She was seen as an obstacle to be eliminated. And now, what did he do to scare her so much? Rose hesitated, struggling against years of training to keep family secrets. But the love she felt for Lucy was greater than any loyalty she might have toward Nathaniel. "He threatened to hurt you and your bull if she continued seeking your friendship," she revealed. "And he threatened me too. Lucy is sacrificing herself to protect the people who made her feel loved for the first time in her life." The nobility of Lucy's heart, even at 6 years old, left Marcus moved and furious at the same time. "We have to get her out of there," he said, his voice firm with determination. "We can't let her continue living in that terror." "It's not that simple," Rose replied, looking again toward the mansion. "Nathaniel has power, money, influence. Who's going to believe the word of an elderly housekeeper and a rancher against a respected businessman?" It was then that an unexpected voice joined the conversation. "Maybe someone who has seen all this up close." Both turned surprised to see Victoria Blackwood approaching. But this wasn't the cold, calculating woman Marcus expected to find. Her eyes were red from crying, and her haughty posture had been replaced by something that suspiciously resembled remorse. "Mrs. Victoria," Rose stammered, panic evident in her voice. We were just talking about how my husband is trying to kill an innocent child," Victoria completed, her voice loaded with bitterness that seemed to come from deep within. "Yes, I know. I've always known." Marcus studied the woman's face, trying to determine if it was a trap or a genuine turn. "If you knew, why didn't you do anything to prevent it?" Victoria closed her eyes as if the question caused her physical pain. "Because I'm a coward," she admitted. "Because I convinced myself it wasn't my responsibility. Because I preferred to close my eyes to what was happening to an innocent child." "And what changed?" Marcus asked, still cautious. "Last night I saw her," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "Lucy was at the window, crying silently while hugging a worn rag doll. And I realized she's the same age as my niece. The same age I was when I went through something similar." The confession hung in the air like a painful revelation. Victoria had recognized her own childhood trauma reflected in Lucy's eyes, and that had awakened a humanity she thought she had lost forever. "Nathaniel doesn't know I discovered his most recent plans," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "He thinks I'm on a trip to a spa, but I came back last night. I heard a phone conversation that made me realize the dog attack was just the first in a series of planned accidents." Rose gripped the fence, her legs almost giving way from shock. "What else is he planning?" "Something involving the stable," Victoria revealed, looking directly at Marcus. "He mentioned something about scared horses and children in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's planning to use Lucy's connection with Thunder against her." The sinister irony of the situation didn't escape Marcus. Nathaniel intended to use Lucy's very love for Thunder as a weapon to destroy her. "We have to act now," Marcus said, his mind already working through possibilities. "But we need evidence." Your word against his might still not be enough. Victoria searched in her purse and pulled out a small recorder. I recorded the phone conversation, she said, her voice trembling from the magnitude of what she was doing. There's enough evidence here to destroy Nathaniel, but there's also enough evidence to destroy me because I knew and did nothing. Why are you doing this now? Marcus asked, studying the woman's face with a new perspective. Because that child deserves to have at least one adult fight for her, Victoria replied, tears flowing freely down her face. And because I can't live with the idea that I became an accomplice to something so monstrous. Rose approached Victoria with hesitant steps. What can we do to protect Lucy? First, we have to get her out of immediate danger, Victoria said, her voice acquiring the determination of someone who had finally found their courage. I have a plan, but it will require all of us to risk everything. Marcus looked at Thunder, who had approached the fence and was observing the conversation with almost human interest. I'm willing to risk everything for her, he said without hesitation. Me too, Rose added, her voice firm despite the evident fear. Victoria nodded, and for the first time in years, Marcus saw something genuinely human in her eyes. Then let's save Lucy, and let's make sure Nathaniel never can hurt another child again. The battle for Lucy's soul was about to enter its most dangerous phase. The unlikely alliance between Marcus, Rose, and Victoria had formed, and tomorrow night would determine whether an innocent child would finally find safety or become another victim of a monster's ambition. What do you think gives ordinary people the extraordinary courage needed to risk everything to save an innocent child from those who should protect them? Darkness enveloped the fields like a protective blanket when Marcus began putting the plan into motion. At 8 p.m., he positioned himself near Thunder's stable, his heart beating strongly against his chest. Sarah was hidden in the house, ready to make the necessary calls as soon as Lucy was safe. On the other side of the fence, Victoria prepared for the most difficult conversation of her life, while Rose continued her normal nighttime routine, trying to keep Lucy distracted while waiting for the agreed signal. Nathaniel was in his study, talking on the phone with someone called Ramiro about the final details of the next day's plan. His voice was cold and calculating, discussing Lucy's life as if it were a business problem to be resolved. At 3 p.m., he was saying, when the housekeeper's in town, it has to look completely accidental. A curious child in the stables, scared horses. You know how to make it look convincing. It was at that moment that Victoria entered the study without knocking. Nathaniel looked at her with surprise, not expecting her to return from the trip. Victoria, I thought you'd be at the spa until Thursday. I changed my mind, she said, closing the door behind her. We need to talk. About Lucy. Nathaniel's blood froze. Victoria placed the recorder on the desk. I recorded your conversation with Ramiro last night, she said, watching her husband's face pale. I know everything, Nathaniel. Outside, Marcus heard raised voices coming from the mansion and knew Victoria had started her part of the plan. It was time to begin the performance. Thunder, he shouted, his voice loaded with feigned but convincing desperation. No, my God, no! The bull, trained to trust Marcus above all else, began neighing loudly and pawing the ground, creating a sound that resonated throughout the property. In the cottage, Lucy jumped from bed upon hearing Thunder's sounds. Mrs. Rose, the little horse is in pain. Rose feigned surprise and concern. My God, what could have happened? Maybe we should go see if everything's okay. Please, Lucy begged, tears already running down her face. We have to help Thunder. It was exactly the reaction they had expected. The child's love for Thunder overcame all the fear Nathaniel had planted in her heart. If you're as moved by Lucy's courage as we are, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. Her story shows us that love truly is stronger than fear, and sometimes the smallest acts of bravery can change everything. Your support helps us continue sharing these incredible tales that prove children are far more resilient and loving than we often realize. Lucy ran toward the door, followed by Rose, both heading toward the source of the distressing sounds. In the mansion's study, Nathaniel stood up abruptly upon hearing the commotion. What the hell is happening out there? It sounds like your plan is starting earlier than expected, Victoria said with coldness, blocking the path to the door. Nathaniel, it's over. You're not going to hurt any more children. Lucy arrived running to where Marcus was staging Thunder's desperation. The bull was lying on the ground, apparently injured. while Marcus knelt beside him, shouting for help. "Thunder!" Lucy cried, running toward the bull without hesitation. Marcus intercepted her gently. "Lucy, thank God you're here. I think he's hurt, but he's very agitated. Only you can calm him." The child knelt beside Thunder, her small hands gently stroking the animal's neck. There, friend. I'm here." Miraculously, Thunder began to calm under Lucy's touch, as if her presence had real healing powers. Marcus took advantage of the moment to whisper to Rose, "Now take her to the car." Rose took Lucy in her arms with the excuse of getting her away from danger. Sarah appeared with the car already running. Everything was happening quickly but coordinatedly. They placed Lucy in the back seat with Rose, still worried about Thunder but trusting the adults who were finally protecting her. In the mansion, Nathaniel had finally managed to push Victoria aside and ran toward the commotion. But when he arrived, he only found Marcus helping Thunder to stand, apparently recovered from his injury. "What happened here?" Nathaniel demanded, his eyes frantically searching for Lucy. "Thunder stumbled and got hurt," Marcus explained calmly. "Fortunately, it wasn't anything serious." "Where's Lucy?" Nathaniel asked, his voice revealing growing panic. "Rose took her home," Marcus lied. "The child got very scared seeing the horse injured." Nathaniel ran back to the cottage but found it empty. It was then he understood he had been deceived. Victoria was waiting for him on the mansion's terrace, still holding the recorder. "What did you do?" Nathaniel roared, advancing toward her. "What I should have done long ago," she replied without retreating. "I protected an innocent child from a monster." It was at that moment they both heard sirens approaching in the distance. Sarah had fulfilled her part of the plan, alerting authorities about the child abuse situation. In the state capitol, Lucy was being examined by doctors specializing in childhood trauma. Dr. Marina Santos, a pediatrician and specialist in child abuse, conversed gently with Lucy while performing the necessary examinations. "Lucy, you're a very brave girl," Dr. Marina said, kneeling to be at the child's eye level. "I know these last weeks have been very scary for you." "The bad man can't hurt me anymore?" Lucy asked timidly. "No, my love," Dr. Marina assured her. "There are many good adults working to make sure you're always safe from now on." Rose remained by Lucy's side during the entire process, providing the emotional comfort the child needed. The legal proceedings against Nathaniel moved swiftly through the courts. With Victoria's recorded evidence, Marcus and Rose's testimonies, and Lucy's own carefully conducted interviews with child psychologists, the case was essentially ironclad. Nathaniel received a sentence of 25 years in prison, without possibility of parole for the first 15 years. The custody hearing for Lucy was held in a small courthouse filled with supporters. The judge made a decision that surprised no one who knew the family dynamics. "It is the finding of this court that Lucy Sullivan will remain in the permanent custody of Marcus and Sarah Sullivan," Judge Roberts announced. "The bond formed between this child and this family represents the kind of healing environment that will best serve Lucy's continued recovery." Lucy's first question upon hearing the news was, "Can I go see Thunder now?" The laughter and tears that followed confirmed that this child had found not just safety, but joy. Victoria had liquidated significant assets to establish a legal defense fund for children in similar situations, ensuring that lack of resources would never prevent proper legal protection. 6 months after the rescue, life had settled into a rhythm none of them could have imagined. Lucy attended the local school, where she excelled academically and socially. Thunder continued his role as ranch guardian and therapy animal, working with child psychologists to develop new approaches to animal-assisted healing. The Sullivan Ranch had been officially designated as a therapeutic animal sanctuary. What emotions do you think Lucy experienced when she realized that adults were finally working together to protect her instead of harm her? 1 year after the rescue that changed everything, the fields of Silverbrook Valley were decorated with colorful flowers and festive ribbons. It was the day of the first annual Thunder's Hope Festival, a celebration that had grown from a simple community gathering into a regional event that attracted visitors from across the country. Lucy, now 7 years old and radiating confidence, stood on a small stage wearing her favorite blue dress, ready to address the crowd that had gathered to honor their extraordinary story. "Welcome, everyone, to our special day," Lucy began, her voice carrying clearly across the field where Thunder grazed peacefully nearby. "A year ago, I was very scared and didn't think anyone cared about me. But Thunder showed me that protection comes in many forms, and my family showed me that love is stronger than fear. The crowd listened in reverent silence as Lucy continued her speech, her words carrying the wisdom of someone who had emerged from trauma with enhanced compassion and understanding. Dr. Marina Santos, who had become a regular visitor and unofficial family member, sat with tears in her eyes as she watched Lucy's remarkable transformation. The child who had arrived at her hospital, broken and terrified, had developed into a confident young advocate whose story was inspiring changes in child protection policies nationwide. Marcus and Sarah sat nearby, their hearts